Let's make sure that all of our streams are going. I think a couple of things are still kicking off. Let's see here. I don't know why let's see, why my TikTok isn't completely working. There we go. Hello, folks, and it looks like we're streaming across all channels. So welcome to another week of Constitutional Conversations. This is Constitutional Conversation number 8. And we're going to do something a little different today than what we usually do, which is usually we discuss an individual highlighted proposal from the Reconstitution. Today, what we're going to do is actually we're going to look back at the 5 proposals we've already highlighted, but more broadly talk about the first 2 proposed amendments that the Reconstitution project is proposing, which includes those 5 proposals, but also has some other items in them as well. I would say they're less eye-catching potentially, but they're very important as well. And we can just discuss them as a group. I can represent the things that I've already presented in summary, succinctly, and also start to outline some of these other pieces, which I will do via. We actually, not to have a plug, but one moment here. We have our paperback version of the Reconstitution, which it's hard to see on TikTok because of the green screen, but I will use that to sort of walk us through these items because we have in the beginning of this book a outline, which is a little bit more of a succinct version of our amendments. So to start, the Amendment 1 of the Reconstitution, which is really our proposed 28th Amendment to the Constitution, because there are already 27 amendments to the Constitution. So the 28th Amendment that we're proposing is subtitled, actually in our outline, the way we describe it is preventing unreasonable accumulations of political power and influence. And this can be done in a host of ways, actually. And, this is why within this proposal, we really have 2 main pieces that we've already discussed as a group, which is campaign finance reform, getting money out of politics. And honestly, that's really the big piece of this first amendment. We also have things in here about term limits and judicial rotations for the Supreme Court, other items that we didn't highlight at a high level, but we will walk through those today. So just to also give some context around the way the Reconstitution is structured is that every section of every amendment starts with sort of a purpose statement. So in other words, for this 28th Amendment that we're proposing, the First Amendment of the Reconstitution, this is about to ensure free and fair elections, in order to ensure that no person or entity gains unreasonable access to or influence upon any public election, and so that all citizens have equal opportunity to influence such elections. So there's the purpose statement, right? And again, this goes back to what I just said about our sort of our outline, which is all about, this amendment's all about preventing unreasonable accumulations of political power and influence. And so the first way, as I mentioned, is with campaign finance, separating money and politics. Similarly to the way the very first amendment of the Constitution outlines the separation of church and state, or at least suggests the separation of church and state, we are separating money from politics. And the way we're doing that is that we are giving legislatures the ability to set limits on money raising in campaigns, which the Congress has tried to do and has successfully done. McCain-Feingold bipartisan campaign finance reform, which was overturned as unconstitutional by Citizens United, ruling that corporations can only speak with their money, and therefore the campaign finance legislation and regulation was ruled as unconstitutional, as a violation of the First Amendment. And so what we're doing right up front, the very first clause of the first section of the First Amendment of the Reconstitution is saying the legislature, Congress, or state legislatures, or any legislature has the power to set limits on money raising in campaigns for elections. And so right off the bat, we are basically explicitly saying that Citizens United no longer stands because it is not a violation of the First Amendment. There is an exception, even if you want to interpret it as a form of free speech, that the legislatures explicitly have this power. Then what we do is we go a step further, which is we really, rather than antagonizing and saying corporations or special interests and that money needs to get out of politics, what we do is we actually sort of we look to a higher order principle, which is what is the purpose of elections, right? It's about finding representation for the people. And the people that representatives are representing should be the ones who have influence over who gets elected, right? That's why they have a vote. So similarly, why not just limit the people who can contribute to an election to be the people who can vote in that election, right? So let's get the money out of small elections and small districts coming from Silicon Valley or from places all over the country. There's no reason that a billionaire in Silicon Valley should be donating to a campaign in rural Georgia. There's no reason that a corporation should be donating to every single candidate in every single race across the country, even if they're against each other. That is counterproductive and ultimately just puts them in a position where no matter who wins, they're in the pocket of that corporation, right? So it really makes no sense. I mean, corporations, and you can look it up, candidates who are running against each other will get donations from the same corporation or the same person because they want to make sure that whoever gets into office, they've contributed to their campaign so that they are owed a favor. So in short, only voters in an election shall contribute to a campaign in that election. That's it. That gets so much money out of politics because it limits the number of people who can donate to each individual campaign, and it makes it specific to the people who are being represented by the representative that gets elected in that campaign. So now we have two things. Legislatures can set limits on money raising, overturning Citizens United. Only voters in an election shall contribute to a campaign in that election. And lastly, making it explicit, because this is an important principle that Citizens United was trying to point to, was that this shall not limit free speech or press. But we are making explicit where the boundaries of that free speech is, which is ultimately, or free press, which is around campaign finance. And so, yes, there will be interesting issues that arise about the financing of documentaries and whether that's a political statement or if it's a educational statement, and those can be litigated, and there can be we have footnotes in our Reconstitution. If you look up the PDF or buy the book, you can see some of the ways that we help make that more explicit. So then moving on to the second thing. So that's campaign finance, separation of money and politics. The second thing is about what we call, and this is specific, so that was about the people, making sure the people are represented. Now we're going to talk about the legislative branch. And the legislative branch, it's all about balancing legislative autonomy with public accountability. And what I mean by that is this feeds back actually into our campaign finance and separation of money and politics issue in a more indirect way, which is that because they're of transparency, we can all see how representatives vote in Congress on specific issues. That actually sort of gives the special interests, the corporations, the donors, visibility into whether the people in their pockets are doing their bidding. And so ultimately, it's sort of this weird tension that we do want transparency in government. We want to know what representatives are voting for and what they're voting against. And I see we have a question on TikTok. I will address you in a second, SWE man. But the idea here is that we have to balance that transparency with the idea that in some cases we may actually want to have less transparency so that a legislator can vote their conscience without being reprimanded by a donor or a corporation or a lobbyist or something like that, and have more autonomy in their ability to vote their conscience. How about stopping corruption in a direct way? SWE man, I'm not sure if you just joined. We did talk just now about a direct way. Now I'm talking about some indirect ways to also go about the same thing. We talked a little bit about overturning Citizens United. We talked about limiting who can donate to campaigns to make sure that it's really coming from voters rather than from people outside of a district or from corporations, etc. And so we're talking about both direct and indirect ways. If you have a suggestion about how to stop corruption that we haven't mentioned yet, I'm happy to listen and open to ideas. And maybe we've already covered it or we will be covering it, and we'll get there if that's the case. So thank you for joining us. Sorry, there's a fruit fly here. So the second piece of that, so on this point of outlaw all lobbying, well, we're about to go there. So the very first piece of this legislative branch principle of the proposed 28th Amendment is that legislatures shall set limits on lobbying by former public servants. So people who, this is called the revolving door, people who have already served in government have access to specific people in government. They have this weird sort of connection, this network that they're leveraging and getting paid to leverage, which is really corrupt. That is directly addressing corruption and stopping corruption, to your point, SWE man. Now, communism is crap, outlaw all lobbying. It's an interesting, and it's something that I think we've explored and discussed. And the interesting thing about lobbying is that there is no way to really outlaw lobbying, because ultimately lobbying is people advocating for issues to their government. And maybe you're specifically talking about corporate lobbying or special interest lobbying. So we have to be really specific about the terms we're using. Outlaw all lobbying would just basically mean that the people can't talk to their representatives, right? So we have to be more specific. And there is something to be said about, even with special interest or industry lobbyists, they have some expertise in areas that is valuable, as long as it's not used in this sort of way that is monetized in order to create incentives, corrupt incentives for politicians to do their bidding. And so it is one of those things where lobbying itself is not bad. As usual, lobbying has been corrupted, and that is the corruption. So make it illegal for lawyers to become politicians. That's interesting. It's definitely a suggestion. I think we've had some really great politicians in the history of America who were formerly lawyers or were lawyers. They do know the law. Not all lawyers are bad. In fact, many of them do great things and have really good knowledge of the law and advocate for really important things. Yes, corporate lobbying was what you're referring to. I understand. So what we need to do is we need to set limits on corporate lobbying. We need to set boundaries and guidelines by which corporate lobbying can be done in a non-corrupt way, in a way that's not bribery, right? In a way that's informative of, hey, if you do this, this is what might happen in this industry. And this is coming from my expertise because I work in this industry, and ensuring that that's really just informative rather than as sort of a bribe or as a corrupt bargain. So on that note, moving on to the next piece of the way we would limit lobbying, especially corporate lobbying and in the context of money, which is public servants shall not use their position for disproportionate personal benefit. And there's an example of this, right? If anyone has watched the documentary, or it's really not a documentary, it's a made-for-TV sort of reenactment of the opioid crisis, Dope Sick. Basically, the FDA approved this crazy label that said that certain drugs, OxyContin, was not as addictive as other painkillers, and everyone said, how the hell did they do that? Well, the guy that approved it, they said, where'd he go? He's not at the FDA anymore. Well, he was working for Purdue. So Purdue Pharma. So what happened was they said, hey, approve this label. And if you do that, you'll come work for us and we'll pay you a lot after the fact. So that would be outlawed and easily prosecutable. I don't know if that's actually the right word, but would be those people could be prosecuted as these would be violations of the Constitution, and they would become crimes, and there would be all sorts of ways of penalizing these things. Lawyers, by definition, prostitutionalize the law based on who is paying them. I would like to understand more. Communism is crap. It's an interesting name. Um, what you would do in a society without lawyers. Lawyers definitely play an important part of our ecosystem. There are lawyers who are defense attorneys who aren't paid by their clients. There's all sorts of lawyers out there. There are lawyers that are compliance lawyers that work for companies. So I think it's a little bit too much of a broad stroke. Maybe there's specific types of lawyers that you would like to outlaw, but happy to hear more about that. Okay, so legislatures shall set limits on lobbying by former public servants. Public servants shall not use their position for disproportionate personal benefit. So you can see that inverse relationship there. In one case, we're setting limits on former public servants, and then in the other case, we're limiting those public servants from becoming private sector beneficiaries. And then this other one, which I was sort of getting at earlier, which is legislatures shall conduct secret ballots when appropriate. And that gets to, if there is an issue that is extremely charged and the Congress decides we need to get something done here, but we can't because special interest money is just too all over it and people are going to get are too on the hook to their donors on this issue, Congress can decide this is going to be done by secret ballot, which eventually the ballots will come out many, many years down the line, but temporarily to shield them from the reprimand, from the sort of the retaliation by their donors while they vote their conscience. So it's an interesting proposal. Would love feedback on this one. It's very, there's controversy there. Transparency is important, but you can see the balancing act we're doing here by balancing autonomy with accountability. Lastly, we state legislatures shall conduct secret ballots for impeachments and removals. So that's saying that Congress actually doesn't have the option in these cases, impeachments and removals. And for the reason that we've seen over the last few years is that Congress, representatives and senators have been hesitant to vote their conscience. They, behind closed doors, have said they wish they could vote this way, but their voters will throw them out. And this is to protect, ultimately, the ability of representatives in the legislature to vote their conscience on really important issues where the people may be misled by somebody who is really manipulative and sort of using the people mass, the sort of this mass mentality, this groupthink to take over. So there's a lot to be said there. We could have a whole episode on that, but I'll leave that one there. I'm not saying outlaw lawyers, just ban them from politics. No federal politician should be eligible for re-election if there's not a balanced budget. Okay, we're on a couple of different issues here. I'm not sure how you could outlaw lawyers from politics. I would love to. I mean, listen, it's not I'm not against it. It's a little bit okay. So here's where I am with that suggestion. It's a little bit of throw the baby out with the bathwater problem. I'm open to it if we really think that that's what we need to do, but I think we can be more precise in the way we handle corruption, the way we handle lobbying, the way we handle money in politics, that we don't need to have broad strokes. Personally, I don't like broad strokes. I feel like they can end up backfiring. Vilifying all lawyers and ruling them out makes them sort of these like weird second-class citizens, and I'm not crazy personally about that idea, but I'm open to it if you have ways that it can be implemented that feels fair and other people agree with it. It's something we could definitely explore in the future. On the balanced budget piece, there are lots of proposals out there for a balanced budget amendment. Very controversial. It's sort of that weird intersection of politics and economics. Not a lot of people are on the same page about what a balanced budget actually looks like, or that it is needed for the health of the economy. But I personally like the idea of it. I just think it also constrains or limits the ability of the government to act in the best interest of the people in emergencies, for example. So there are risks there as well, but happy to discuss that as well. They vote against what the majority of people want most of the time. That's true, but they vote with the majority of the money of the people who donate to them most of the time. Top 3 issues: economy, rising crime, and border security. Thank you, Yoshua. Please check out our website. We have lots of proposals on all of those issues at thereconstitution.com. If you click the proposal section, if we can remove money from politics, this would solve most of our problems. Yes. And that's what our very first proposal of the Reconstitution is about: separation of money and politics. You can go to our website, thereconstitution.com, or you can go on our TikTok and scroll down. We have a thumbnail that's right there, says the separation of money and politics. Watch that video and it tells you all about how we are going about that. Cool. So let's move on. So we've talked a little bit about the people and campaign finance and getting money out of politics. We've talked about the legislative branch and lobbying and getting money out of politics there. We've talked about secret ballots and balancing autonomy with accountability. Now let's talk about the judicial branch. Sorry. Thank you, yes, to ranked choice voting. We will get there in a moment. The judicial branch, our statement here is depoliticize the judiciary by lowering stakes with term limits. So we think that actually the reason, and of course there will always be politics involved, this is politics, but the reason that the Supreme Court has become so politicized is because of the amount of power it actually has and the longevity of that power. I mean, a justice could be on the court for a generation, for 30 plus years, and there's sort of like, if you get that person in, it's just such a long-term win, right? And so if we can sort of lower the stakes, we lower the temperature. And if we lower the temperature, we lower the polarization and the politicization of the court itself. So it would actually be in the best interest of the health of the court to lower the stakes. And so what we mean by that is that legislatures shall set term limits for judicial positions. 2, specifically, the Supreme Court hears constitutional issues only. We may expand on that. We've been discussing internally. There are other issues that the Supreme Court does hear: international law, maritime law, more technical things, and we'll get back to that. But more importantly, Supreme Court justices shall each have one 18-year term. It's still important that it's long because they need to be apolitical and not be subject to sort of needing to be reelected or needing to be liked. But one 18-year term, there's still a limit to it. And with one justice rotated out every 2 non-election years. So if there's a midterm in 2022, there's a general election in 2024, 2023, 2025, you would have one Supreme Court justice switch out with another justice from our federal Court of Appeals. Yes, the Supreme Court is designed to be lifelong terms. The Supreme Court is solely there to judge if a ruling is constitutional or not. That's all. That is what most of us understand, and that is true most of the time. But there are interesting cases of international law and maritime law that honestly I'm not familiar enough with myself, but I've been told by people in these forums to look into. So it's something that we will look into to make sure that we are covering all of our bases. But yes. So not lifelong terms, long terms, but not lifelong terms. And the stakes go down and the politicization goes down. And the rotational aspect of it means that we have a very clear pool of people we're choosing from. You can't just pick someone out of the blue. It's someone who's already been approved to the Court of Appeals. And so it's less politicized as well because we're not just dealing with someone brand new. Okay. So that's the judicial branch. Last is the executive branch. Adapt new executive powers to circumstances. Now, what do I mean by that? The executive branch has this tendency to have, over the years, expanded its power, and for tons of good reasons, right? The world has become more interdependent, the country has become more interdependent, and it requires a little bit more centralized control. War or the economy, all of these things require some centralization, some coordination. We saw this with COVID. We've seen this with wars. We've seen this with the Patriot Act. We've seen this with all of these things require more coordination. The problem is that it's very hard to claw that back once it's been given. And we know it's going to continue to expand, but shouldn't some things, once the emergency is over, sort of return to the power of the people, to return to the Congress or the courts or whoever originally had that power? So what we have here is that legislatures, when they grant power to the executives, shall set conditions on powers granted to the executive. Period. They shall set conditions at which about terms and conditions by which return those powers. So there has to be some sort of an expiration. It doesn't have to be a date. It can be a criteria, but there have to be conditions. It can't just be new powers to the executive without conditions. Second, legislatures shall be able to delegate policymaking to independent executive agencies. Now, this is called the non-delegation doctrine, which basically means that legislature can't create a new agency and be like, okay, you go, write some laws and do what's best for, go EPA, do what's best for the environment. Instead, they have to pass laws that make broad statements about what they want to accomplish, and then the EPA implements those within a very narrow area of rulemaking. This opens up the possibility to say, hey, these agencies are there for a reason. They're the experts. They're not as gridlocked. You're here for a purpose. What's your purpose? Okay, Environmental Protection Agency. It's to protect the environment. Write rules to protect the environment. And it's okay to delegate some of that responsibility to these experts in the field. It's terrifying that fascists are gaining support on rewriting the Constitution. We should pray. I'd love to understand what group you're referring to, and also what you mean by rewriting the Constitution, Judson Putney. We are not rewriting the Constitution here. We are proposing a series of amendments. Lastly, military power shall remain centralized in the executive, but the pardon power shall be limited by legislatures. And so we've witnessed this recently, the pardon power being abused, not just in the most recent administration, but administration over administration. The pardon power is really valuable because there have been really great instances of its use, but there have also been really corrupt ways of using it. So I think we should make sure that the legislature can limit that corruption. And that's the last piece of our proposed 28th Amendment, which again is about preventing unreasonable accumulations of political power and influence. And all of those things contribute to that sort of vicious cycle of power begets power. The more power you have, the easier it is to get more power and stay in power. And that cycle continues. So that is the proposed 28th Amendment. Now, we should get rid of the agencies and then remake them so they don't get you bloated. I'm good with remaking them. That's totally fine. But that would be done by the legislature. Repeal the 14th Amendment. That is not something we are for. The 14th Amendment is pretty important, and it establishes due process at the state level and all sorts of really important things. I understand there are concerns with substantive due process, and maybe you don't like that interpretation. We do have things in the Reconstitution that we think could supplant substantive due process and maybe play a better role than it has, and a clearer role. So that's the take on the 14th Amendment. And on the 16th Amendment, yes, we know nobody likes to have taxes to be taxed, but we do believe that there needs to be some way to raise money for government spending. I understand maybe it doesn't have to be income. We do have some really interesting proposals coming later in our amendment series on how that is on refining sort of that and making it fairer, about what kinds of income can be taxed and how they're taxed, and making sure that it sort of still means that people have a good standard of living and that businesses aren't giving unfair advantages. But we are not for repealing the 16th Amendment, although it is an interesting and worthwhile proposal to explore. We're more about refining it and making it clearer. So the Constitution still has a taxation clause even without the 16th. Yes, but the 16th did provide some necessary power to be more explicit about specifically income tax. So then our second proposed reconstitutional amendment, which is our proposed 29th Amendment to the Constitution, is to ensure political representation reflects the people represented. And this is a problem we really have, which is that the people that we elect into power don't tend to represent us. I mean, that's just plain and simple. Congress has a very low approval rating. People are very frustrated with their own representation, and people don't feel like they have a voice in the halls of Congress and the halls of power. And so how can we fix that and make sure that the people in power actually reflect the people that vote them into power? So, and not just that the decisions that are being made reflect the will of the people. So the very first thing we have is called deliberative democracy, and I highly encourage you to go watch our video from a month or so ago called A Seat at the Table, and it explains what deliberative democracy is, which has been implemented all over the world in different places experimentally. And what it basically is a way to have the equivalent of what I like to think of as legislative juries. Randomly selected citizens are formed by petition. A state or a county or a local jurisdiction or the country decides this issue is really important. We need to come up with a solution for this, but we don't trust Congress because they haven't been doing anything about it. So let's do a lottery and choose a random group of people to come together. Let's have experts come in and talk to them about the issue, different solutions to the issue, and then those people work together to propose and craft a proposal for a solution. They elect internally a speaker of their convention, and this citizen convention that's been assembled randomly by individual at an individual county or state or jurisdiction level, then takes that proposal and presents it to their legislative body. So the Senate, the Assembly, a state Senate, a state Assembly, or Congress, or any of the above. And basically that convention, the speaker of that convention co-sponsors that legislation, or sponsors that legislation before Congress, and Congress can approve that legislation. And there's more pressure on that body to do something because it's coming directly from the people. And that jurisdiction, that body, is actually required to take that legislation up as its next order of business, rather than sort of, the usual, like, oh, we're not going to vote on it. No, you have to. Like, this is coming from the people. You have to. The other alternative is it can go to the people directly, sort of like an initiative, which is done all the time in California, where it's then voted on by the population at large to be ratified. So just to go through the main points, but deliberative democracy reinvigorates civic engagement through participation. So this is the other piece that's great. It's getting people involved, getting them active, and it's making civic life more colorful. The people shall petition a jurisdiction to form a citizen convention. Citizen conventions shall focus on a specific purpose and shall be formed upon approval by public ballot. So the public is basically voting to say this is important, we want to take it up. And also it needs to be a specific purpose. It's not like, let's consider these 5 issues. This is a big problem with Congress, which is that anytime we want to take on an issue, someone sees, oh, this is a popular one. And then they inject their thing in, which isn't popular, and the whole thing just dies because we try to lump too many issues together. So that is not allowed here. Between 12 and 24 participants shall be selected at random, controlled for demographics. So we try to make it representative of the people. 12 to 24, making it so that there's not too many cooks in the kitchen, but it's also scalable depending on the size of, or the level of the jurisdiction, whether it's local, state, or federal. Participation shall be optional, but participants shall be provided stipends, and employment shall be protected during the citizen convention. Similarly to, juries, you can't lose your job just for serving. Citizen conventions shall be facilitated by specialized, independent, nonpartisan agencies. So there are sort of conflict resolution, mediation agencies that are really well suited to facilitate these, so that it's not government facilitating issues that could implicate government. It's this independent agency, and it sort of can be a function of the free market. The most successful results of deliberative democracy, people will look and say, well, which agency facilitated that? Oh, I want them to do more of these. So I think we would end up seeing really good emergent agencies out of that. And participants shall elect a speaker by ranked choice voting, we're coming back to that, to produce and present the results to the jurisdiction's legislature for consideration, or to the people for public ballot, which we just discussed. So that is deliberative democracy. Now, on the same point, the executive branch's role in deliberative democracy is ensuring the efficient formation of citizen conventions. So petitions shall be received by the executive of the jurisdiction, and that executive shall manage the random selection process and provide funding for the citizen conventions, period. After that, they are no longer involved because we want them out of the process. So they just do the selection and the funding, and that's the end of it. the legislative side, the legislature has a duty to reclaim public trust by listening to the people and what comes out of deliberative democracy. So the legislature shall receive the speaker as a co-sponsor of legislation driven by the results of the citizens' convention. Legislation derived from the citizen convention shall be considered independently of other legislative proposals. So again, you can't lump these things together because that just is the way every legislative proposal goes to die. And legislation adopted as a result of a citizen convention shall be publicized to the people with transparency, simplicity, and clarity. So there needs to be transparency. We need to tell the people what happens in these citizen conventions in a way that the everyday citizen can understand without being too technical, so that people can really support and lend voices to it and advocate for this, so that there's pressure for solutions that are proposed that are well liked for Congress or the legislature that's looking at it to actually approve it. So that's deliberative democracy. There's the aspect of just the formation of it and the people aspect. There's the executive's role. There's the independent agency's role, and there's the legislature's role. And of course, the judiciary always oversees that these things are all happening in alignment with the purpose of the amendment as it's written in the Constitution, or in this case, in the Reconstitution. This brings us to our next highlighted proposal that we discussed. And if you scroll down in TikTok or go to our website, the third chamber of Congress. I'm not going to spend too long here because I could spend way too long on this one. We've already spent a lot of time on this one, but basically creating a new chamber of Congress. We have the Senate, we have the House. The Senate is two senators per state. The House is proportional, so states with bigger population sizes have more representatives, and this is done for a reason, which is the counter-majoritarian problem, making sure that small states with small populations don't totally get drowned out by states with large populations, because they do have important different interests, even though they have lower population sizes. But the problem is that in this day and age, states are the less important minority being drowned out. What's actually we're noticing is that people are aligning politically along where they live, so population density. Do they live in a city, in a rural area, in a suburban area, and also by their socioeconomic status. Are they poor? Are they rich? Are they middle class? And also, did they inherit wealth? Are they retired? All of these sort of socioeconomic positions, which are really delineated between income and wealth, which are kind of different, even though they are related. And so this third chamber of Congress is actually formed to represent people in a way that transcends geography. So people, for example, if you're poor and you live in Detroit, and you're poor and you live in LA, and you're poor and you live in New York, and you're poor and live in Montgomery, Alabama, all of those people would be represented by the same representative because they share this common trait, which is that they are poor, so they're low income, low wealth, and they live in an urban area. Imagine that. Now, those three categories across three classifications: low, medium, high, low, medium, high income, low, medium, and high wealth, low, medium, high population density, and make a matrix out of that. And what you end up with is 27 combinations. And so we are suggesting 27 members of this third chamber of Congress, one to represent each of those groups of people. And the nice thing here is that it's a smaller body, which means that less cooks in the kitchen, more easy to get things done, more visibility, more accountability. And also, now that we have three chambers of Congress, it only takes 2 out of 3 to get to the president's desk. And so there's more opportunities for legislation to pass. And there's also now more incentive for each body to get on board, because no body wants the legislature to pass something to the president without their involvement. And so it could be the House and what we're calling this body is the Assembly of Shared Interests. So you could have something to the president's desk the traditional way. The House and the Senate agree. You could have the House and the Assembly agree. You could have the Senate and the Assembly agree, or you could have all three agree. And we believe, actually, by creating this incentive structure, you'll probably end up with all three agreeing, because nobody wants to get left out of the equation. And so it will lubricate the wheels of legislation of the legislature. So that is our tricameral Congress. So rejuvenate Congress by representing new shared interests. Congress shall be expanded to include a new assembly of shared interests that transcends geographic boundaries. The assembly of shared interests shall be made up of 27 delegates, which represent the people based on their surrounding population density, annual income, and total wealth. Legislation shall be presented to the president for approval upon passage by any 2 of the 3 chambers of the tricameral Congress. The assembly of shared interests shall assume the special powers and duties previously delegated to the Senate. Next is federalism, elections, and parties. So restore the integrity of self-determination. What this is about state rights. And that the federal government shall not abridge the rights of states or local communities beyond what is necessary to preserve the shared values elaborated in the Constitution. So basically, giving the rights of making it clear that local communities have rights to establish their own customs, their own norms, their own values, their own laws, their own all of that, and yeah, that there are certain principles that need to be supreme, right? Certain human rights, certain constitutional rights. But at a high level, we do want to reaffirm the importance of self-determination at various levels of scale, whether it's local, county, state, uh, region, federal, all of those things, and there needs to be different levels of specificity as you go down the chain. Next is gerrymandering. So electoral districts shall minimize the efficiency gap in order to end gerrymandering. Now, if you've been in our previous constitutional conversations, we have discussed removing this provision specifically because gerrymandering, this is a direct ending of gerrymandering, but we believe that it is indirectly ended by virtue of a better provision we have that I'm about to get to, which is ranked choice voting. So all elections shall be conducted by ranked choice voting, a single transferable vote, and political parties shall not be mentioned on ballots, getting parties out of politics. Not saying parties are illegal, they're not banned, they're inevitable, but getting them out of our official processes, off the ballot, off of the rules of, deciding who's Speaker of the House, all of that should not implicate parties. But more importantly, ranked choice voting allows us to rank our candidates, which means that we can vote for third-party candidates. We can vote for independent candidates without worrying about wasting our vote. And that sort of ends this sort of downward spiral of nobody wanting to vote for a third party or independent candidate simply because they don't think they're going to win. And sort of this whole conundrum of it's a little bit of a game theory problem of how do you get someone elected without being part of a party? Well, if there's nothing to lose in voting for them, ranked choice voting, then people will start voting for them. And then you'll start seeing more independent candidates getting into office. So that's a really important one. And as a result, because nobody has a vote to waste, there are no wasted votes in theory. And then gerrymandering becomes less relevant. Dissolve the Electoral College. Happy to discuss this with you at another time, Pickled Pagan. You can look back at our video from a few weeks ago. If you go to YouTube and look up the Reconstitution, the third chamber of Congress, we talk about the Electoral College and why we may have a better solution. Well, I wouldn't say not dissolving it, but we're also not getting. What we're doing is we're replacing the Electoral College with the new Electoral College in theory, using this third chamber of Congress idea. So check that out. And maybe we'll be more specific about that in the future. Actually, let me just take a note here for myself on that. Shared assembly. Cool. So we talked about ranked choice voting, and then party primaries shall not be funded by or affiliated with any official electoral processes. That's what we were just discussing, getting political parties out of politics. And political parties shall not be referenced in any official capacity for the conducting of government functions. More of the same. Dex Mercedes, what is ranked choice voting? Ranked choice voting means that you don't just select a candidate that you want to vote for. You rank the candidates on the ballot based on your preference. So your top choice, your second choice, your third choice. And what happens is if your top choice sort of doesn't have a chance, then your vote goes to your second choice. So there's no harm in voting actually for your top choice anymore, which is fantastic because it eliminates that catch-22 of nobody wants to vote for their first choice because, well, if your first choice isn't going to win, is that a waste of a vote? Well, if everyone feels the same way, then of course they're not going to win. So it eliminates that sort of circularity. And yes, I'm glad you like it. Please go to our website or scroll down in our TikTok page. We have a video called People Over Party. You'll see the icon. It's a little sort of looks like our logo, but it says People Over Party in it. And we have a great explanation of how ranked choice voting works there and why it works and how all of the positive impacts it has. I've said time and time again, it is not something that we have invented, the Reconstitution, but we do think that is probably the most important proposal in the Reconstitution. And there's a reason that a lot of organizations are picking it up. The Forward Party, Andrew Yang's party, considers it their top issue. And by the way, this is not new or radical. New York City, Maine, Alaska, all have started using ranked choice voting over the last several years. So it's coming to a city and a state and a country near you. And the quicker we implement it, the more we will break the gridlock in Washington, and the more we will restore political independence to our political process, and allow for independent voters to vote their mind and independent candidates to get into office with fresh ideas. So I highly encourage you to go back and watch that video, scroll down on your TikTok feed, and you'll find it. People Over Party includes a couple of other things, but focuses very heavily on ranked choice voting. It's really important. It's enormous as an upgrade to democracy for the 21st century. Heart 3170, our account is about discussing proposed creative ideas about ways we can improve the Constitution, and the way we can improve government, and the way we can make government and politics work for people. We are not necessarily calling for any of these things tomorrow, but we are essentially a political awareness, political education group that is trying to spread the word about new ideas, and trying to solicit creative ideas in the crafting of some new proposals that hopefully can get some traction and people can start to learn a little bit about what's possible. So we are having these constitutional conversations to get people involved in the process as we craft these. Go to our website, thereconstitution.com, and there's more info there for you. Lastly, the judiciary. So this is the last piece of our Second Amendment of the Reconstitution, our proposed 29th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which is about ensuring political representation reflects the people represented. So we've talked about deliberative democracy. We've talked about federalism, elections and parties, gerrymandering, political parties, ranked choice voting. And now, what is the role of the judiciary in all of this? Well, of course, upholding due process and protecting checks and balances. And so they have the power of oversight over the proceedings relating to the citizen conventions, deliberative democracy, and of course that ensuring that the will of the people is afforded due process in accordance with the stated purposes throughout these constitutional amendments. So just really clarifying that their purpose is to ensure that the purpose of the Constitution and the provisions in the Constitution are protected for the will of the people. So now we have a few questions coming in because that wraps up all the things I wanted to review. Who are you talking to? I definitely think apartments should get tax incentives for charging affordable rent. We have something on that coming. Well, not specifically that NeuroSpark, but I think something that gets to that point is coming down the line called the American Dream deduction, which is a tax incentive, and you'll learn a bit more about that in the coming months. Check it out on our website if you want to get a sneak preview. I'm a former Republican who left because of Trump, and I'm politically homeless right now. Join us, Lombardi Avenue. We don't like to think of ourselves as homeless. I think let's reframe that. Consider yourself politically independent, right? We are founded on a constitution, which is founded on Declaration of Independence. We are independent-minded people. That's what this country is all about. And there's no reason that you need to belong to a party or an ideology or an economic theory or a group of people or a leader to be loyal to. Just be yourself. Think about each individual issue and think about how the implications of that issue, how it affects you, how it affects the people around you. Think about the complexity of it and how it affects other issues, and just vote your conscience. It shouldn't have to be about what party you belong to, like a religion. We should use ideology, conservative, liberal, libertarian, as toolkits, as lenses by which we can try to solve issues. But they don't need to be things that we belong to, right? They're things that we can use. And that's a lot of what we're trying to reframe. So I wouldn't want to call myself, and I don't think you need to call yourself politically homeless. Just consider yourself politically independent. And I think that's an empowering way to look at it. Thank you, NeuroSpark. I'm not really sure what the Dongers was referring to, so I'm just going to ignore that. Include more parts, 2A, include more political parties or get rid of them. Heart 3170, I think that's what ranked choice voting would do, is essentially it doesn't get rid of them, but it gets them out of politics. So they're political parties that aren't influencing the political system. And we allow for more of them by implementing ranked choice voting. Country over party for sure. Political parties are a mess. We actually like to say people over party rather than country over party, because this is really about the people, right? And individual people having independence and the ability to think for themselves and to not have to belong to an organization that is something other than themselves, and representing what they truly believe is the right direction for the country. And yes, political parties can become like cult-like very fast. Thank you, Lombardi. Please check out our website, follow us. You can get our book online, which again, it's hard to see on the green screen, but it has all of our proposals, our outline, and lots of really interesting footnotes in there. So highly encourage you to get that. It's on our website. A couple other comments coming in through Facebook. Leonard, when it comes to preventing corruption, how broad is the provision of Amendment 28, Section 2, Clause 2 about public employees not benefiting themselves? Let's take a look. So Amendment 28, you said Section 2, Clause 2 is public officials and public employees shall be prohibited from using their public office to disproportionately benefit themselves, their spouse, children, employer, or entities with which they have certain business interests while in office during employment or henceforth. This addresses the reverse revolving door by which officials in the public sector are awarded for their loyalty after the fact. For example, there has been a lot of talk about a stock trading ban. Would that be included? It's something definitely something worth talking about. I don't believe that we need to have a stock trading ban for political officials after they're in office, which is what this is sort of about. It is definitely worth considering, though, having one while they are in office, because of course the votes that they cast, the policies that they implement do impact the stocks that they could be trading. So that seems like a form of self-interest and self-dealing. So Leonard, let's definitely bring that to the table at one of our integration sessions and talk about a way to add that and make that more specific in our document. I'm just noting that down. Let's see. We already have that. It's called the Convention of States. I'm not sure what you were referring to, U.S. versus everyone. What's difficult to students aren't taught a non-biased view. So much of our schools are political. Yes, Neurospark, it'd be really interesting to talk to you about this sometime. We have another project that we are trying to spin up, which involves what we call X-doctrination, which is about sort of thinking meta-ideologically, as we've been saying. So about there is no way of not being biased. We're all biased, but it's about being aware of your bias. And I think that is, and I don't mean that in sort of this weird woke way. I mean that in a genuine self-awareness way of like, I tend to be a little more liberal in my views, and this is why. And I'm aware that I am that, and I am proud of that. But I also acknowledge that I could be wrong. Again, this goes back to the principles of the Reconstitution, which are curiosity, humility, respectfulness, patience, resilience, creativity. But specifically in this one, it's very much about humility, right? We can be aware of why and what we stand for and why, but also acknowledging that maybe we're wrong and being okay with that. And as a result, being curious about what other people think and why they think that, to maybe be able to contradict ourselves and realize and learn and grow that maybe our views aren't wrong, maybe they're half wrong, and evolve our views. US versus everyone. If Andrew Yang likes it, it's trash. Okay, well, we don't like, again, going back to the respectfulness thing and this whole belonging thing. Just because one person likes it doesn't make it trash. Let's take each individual issue on its own terms and evaluate it separate from who likes it, who doesn't like it. If some tyrant of the past liked chocolate ice cream, that doesn't mean that chocolate ice cream is bad. It just means that that person liked chocolate ice cream, and so do I, and that doesn't make chocolate ice cream anything. And then these children, people are unable to think of government in a dynamic way. The entire thing you're talking about. Sorry, what? We already have this. It's called the Convention of States. This whole thing you're already talking about. I'm not sure what you think we're talking about, USV, everyone, but I'd be curious to understand what you mean there. Imagine a 0.05% tax on every single stock bought or sold. It would hit high velocity traders more. Yeah, there's a lot of talk about transaction taxes in the stock market. It's definitely an interesting proposal. I think something that specific we would want to leave to the legislature. There's no reason it needs to be constitutionalized, but I think a lot of the proposals we are proposing would open up healthy political processes that would allow the legislature to pass that, right? Like getting rid of the gridlock, getting parties out of politics, getting money out of politics, would mean that the legislature would pass common sense solutions like a 0.05% tax on every single stock bought or sold, or something like that, after properly being evaluated economically on its impact. But we would be able to do that without being held back by all these other corrupt things. Let's see. Stock market keeps tabs on everything moves. It should be difficult. Not that. How is schooling political? And that Tax used properly. Yeah. So lots to consider there. I'm glad that we like created such a enlivening conversation. I'm sorry I'm not that articulate today. I work in education and it is back to school season, so I'm a little tired and a little less articulate than usual. But I really appreciate you all joining me. We will be putting out some more content shortly. Our next session, our next constitutional conversation, will be October. 2 Thursdays from today, which will be October, I believe it's 6th. Let me double check for you all. And we will be doing a special session on a political quiz that a partner organization of ours is putting out. And that will help you better understand your own politics, be more self-aware of it, think more paradoxically, so be able to hold multiple views at the same time. And it's a way of, I think, reframing politics to be a little bit more independent, as we've discussed earlier with some of you, and especially in a world where people feel politically homeless, re-empowering people to see that as political independence and political expansiveness, and as a way of having viewpoint diversity. So look out for that. October 6th at 5 p.m. We'll be discussing that. We'll put out a video beforehand. In the meantime, thank you guys so much for joining. Thank you, everyone. And yes, there definitely is. I work in education. There is a culture war going on in the classroom, and it's really unfortunate. But I think that we all know the reasons for that, which is that the children are the future, and so people are trying to win the future by using the children as pawns, and that's not okay. But we have a lot to work out amongst ourselves, and that's why this project is here, so that we can not just propose things politically, but culturally have conversations and start to talk to each other respectfully and get on the same page that we all really intend the best. So let's start working together and having better conversations, and then we can create a better future. That's really what this is about. So thank you all for joining me. Have a great rest of your evening, and I'll speak to you in a couple weeks. Look out for more content coming soon.